look, another glorious morning, and another Luke Combs t-shirt. Another day where I am still not a cow person's wife. No feeding the chickens, no roping in the cows, no homemaking, no endless baking of pies, no sweeping the dust off the porch. Alas, instead, just another really long intro to try and put off for as long as physically possible telling you any of the numbers on my bingo board. Because, guys, we need to talk. And welcome back to another video. Joyous entrance to November. Please pull up a chair. Get your rotten fruit ready. So, how are you? Read any good books lately? Had a nice time in a restaurant? Driven anywhere new? Okay, I'm officially out of polite conversation and I suppose we should just do the thing. Let's start again, shall we? Hi guys, it's Leanne and welcome back to my November TBR and Bingo Board of Doom update. Because yes, the Bingo Board of Doom is the name that we shall be going for next year's bingo board, and it shall have appropriate artwork to suit. I'm thinking flames and meteorites. I can't think of any other forms of doom right now, but we'll go with those ones. And yeah, if you're also sitting there thinking, how is it possibly time to come up with another bingo board? How is it November? How can all of this year's challenges possibly be nearly over? That expression on your face was also the expression on my face when I updated the numbers on my bingo board. Well, okay, the expression on my face looked more like... but you catch my drift. But let's be honest, although the numbers on my bingo board are not exactly what I would have wanted them to be at this point in the year, I don't feel defeated. And I think that's a good sign. This is the first time that I have ever done a long sustained reading challenge in any format, and I haven't rocked up at the end of it feeling like I've failed in some way. I mean, there's no real way to not start the year with lofty intentions. We all fall into the January trap, and all plans, no matter whether they're good plans or bad plans, and some of my bingo board was definitely a bad plan, all plans will inevitably end up going slightly awry as the year goes on and life hits us with lifey things. But this is the first time that I've looked at a bunch of numbers which kind of unequivocally say that I have not reached the targets that I have set for myself, and I haven't felt bad about it. Lo, is that personal growth we see over there somewhere? Because from the prompts that I've already picked for next year's bingo board, I think I can already see a shift in the way that I'm looking at cataloguing my reading, and a shift in the challenges that actually mean something to me versus the challenges that I'm just putting myself through because I think I should. For a good example of this, let's look at my Read 12 Kindle book square. I made this square because I have a really terrible habit of buying books on Kindle and then not reading them. Also of borrowing tons of Kindle Unlimited books and never getting to them either, but that's by the by. And I wanted this square to motivate me to read more from my Kindle graveyard. But instead what this square has taught me is that I personally really see my Kindle as like a backup method of reading for me. But actually more like it's functional, and that may change in the future. I may fall back in love with reading from my Kindle. I do go through big phases where I read faster on it. But for right now, it's not my preferred method of reading. But when I look at that, I'm not like, oh my god, I need to get on that and constantly beating myself up about it, but instead I'm seeing a shift, both in how I view this square and my Kindle, and also in how many Kindle books that I have been buying. Because for as long as this square has been on my bingo board, I have been more aware of buying books on my Kindle, and I have bought significantly less than I normally would have. So yeah, this square is a great example of previously I would have used this number to beat myself up, and now I'm like, no, actually now we've learned things and next year we'll go on and do things differently. To that mind, let's get on with the update of the rest of my bingo board, and then let's tell you about the books that I'm planning on reading in November. Because November for me is very much going to be a month of two halves. It is the first half of November, which is going to be my TBR TBR and the things that I want to get done or need to get done for book clubs. And the second half of November is all for mixtape. In case you missed my announcement, myself and my lovely co-hosts Beth and Becca are going to be running a round of mixtape in November from the 16th to the 29th of the month. It is the cabin edition of mixtape. It is not only a traditional mixtape with our traditional bingo board, but it's also a choose your own adventure. And that is why for the first time doing mixtape, I don't know what my TBR is going to be in advance, and I can't tell you because I am going to be using the storybook for mixtape to choose my books as I go along, and I'm going to be vlogging that process for you. And so I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to be reading in the second half of this month. And yes, if you are sitting there thinking, wow, she looks stressed out about that, then you are right, I am. Because it deliciously feels close to mood reading, which for me is historically not a great thing to do. We know from my history that if I go into a month and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna mood read this month, it's usually because we have the spicy brain. So it feels really close to that delicious place of mood reading without actually being mood reading. And I don't know, am I turning into a roll as you go girly? Am I gonna start not planning readathon prompts and just doing whatever I like as I go? I don't know how I feel about that, because I feel like that way could lie danger. So first up, let's just have a look at my read 75% of my 2023 purchases square, aka my great nemesis and the square that you guys are the most emotionally invested in. In September, which was the last time that I updated the numbers on my bingo board, I was sitting at 59% red. However, it is now November, and the last time I updated this board was the start of September, was for my September TBR. So that meant that between September and October, there was quite a vast stack of books slowly piling its way up in my library, which had not made it onto my spreadsheet yet. And so now that those books have made it onto my reading spreadsheet, and we have calculated the effect of the massive slump that I had in October, the percentage of my 2023 purchases that I have read has gone down from 59% to 42%, which was an eventuality that I did not account for. I did not expect to add so many books to my TBR at the end of this year. And while I'm not sad about any of those TBR books, I'm excited for all of them and I wouldn't change purchasing any of them. I am a little tiny bit sad that the reality is we're probably going to be breaking the 50% mark for this in December. Previously, this number would have thrown me into an absolute tailspin. But it hasn't, because I've learned a lot from this square this year. I've learned a lot from tracking all of the books that I have purchased this year. And in December or early January, when I bring you my completed stats for 2023, you will see that this square has been the most useful square on this entire bingo board in motivating me this year. So barreling rapidly through the rest of the squares on my bingo board, we have got my buddy reads square. In September, this was sitting at 7 buddy reads, and I can now happily say that it is sitting at 10 buddy reads, which actually gets me up to speed for the year. I just need 2 more, one in November and one in December, and we have met our goal of 12 buddy reads for the year. As for my 12 audiobooks, in September we had finished off that square and got our first star in it, and as of November we are now sitting at 4. There is actually a possibility that we may complete this square off a second time before the end of the year, and if that happens, I am allowed to take 5% off of my read 75% of my 2023 purchases, which would of course make it 70% and slightly more achievable, but I still don't think we're going to be getting much over 50%, so I'm not holding my breath on that one. Next we have my read 5 non-fiction books, which we did complete off twice, and it was sitting at 1 in September. It is still sitting at 1. I didn't read any non-fiction in September or October. I am reading a ton of non-fiction now, and again it's possible that we might complete this off again before the end of the year, but it's not going to help that percentage, so again, not that exciting. As for my read 12 series tracker books, we left that at 5, I think, in September, and we are now sitting at 8. So I am definitely making progress in my series tracker. There will be another update video for that in January where I will add all of the new series that I have started this year and complete off a bunch of things that I've either DNF'd, decided not to go any further on, or have completed. Next we have our Read 10 graphic novels, which we completed off in September, and we are now sitting at 2. I do not think that I am going to complete this one off again before the end of the year. I just don't have that many graphic novels sitting on my shelves unread, and I don't really anticipate buying many more before the end of the year. There's a chance that in December I may get a couple as gifts, but I'm probably still not going to read them before the end of the year. So I think this one is roughly as good as it's going to get. And then of course we have my finished 3 ongoing series square, which was sitting at 2 in September and is still sitting at 2 now. And no, this is a square that I don't want to talk about. This is perhaps the only square that I don't feel great about on this bingo board. And it's a square that we're definitely going to have to talk about more in depth next month, because next month is the month where I will launch my new bingo board, and I will also give it to you guys in case you also want to torture yourself with bingo board doom next year. So that's it. Those are all of the updates for my bingo board as of the start of November. And now let me take you into the TBR book. The books that I know that I actually want to read, as opposed to the books that Mixtape is going to inflict upon me later on in the year. First up is my contribution to my Buddy Read square. You can actually see it sitting all tabbed up on the very edge of my TBR cart. I might as well get it. Look, it's me actually holding up a book. Praise me. The only reason I'm holding it up is because I can put it back on my TBR cart, which by the way is the reason that I don't drag off my shelves all of the books that I talk about in my videos, because ADHD means that I just leave them in piles all around my study, and they almost never all get put back in the place that they should in a timely fashion. And also it means I don't get distracted by things like, what is the crunchy thing under this spine? Huh! I've never seen that before. It's like when the embossing machine has gone in to put the Picador logo on it, it's kind of like raised up and taken some of the fabric with it. That's so strange. Well, now I've got something to fiddle with while I read. Anyway, in case I didn't say it before, this is contributing to my Buddy Read square. Kirsty and I are going to read this one. It's been sitting on both of our shelves for quite a long time because it's massive and it's quite dense and we're both quite intimidated by it. So Patrick Radden Keefe is an investigative journalist. He has a podcast, and in this particular book he is looking at the Sackler dynasty, which is a hugely powerful and massively wealthy family who I think are based out of New York. They're really famous in the art world because they've contributed to like a bunch of massive exhibitions, like lent pieces and built wings in museums and stuff. But nobody really knew where the wealth of the family had come from until Patrick Radden Keefe did a bit of digging and discovered that the Sackler name was actually also on Oxycontin, and also I think on Valium and a bunch of other painkillers that kind of kicked off the opioid crisis in the States. So this is kind of an investigation into the family, but also an investigation into like the ethics behind manufacturing and selling drugs and what your moral and ethical responsibilities are when you have done that. And also because this is a hugely wealthy family, should they now be contributing some of that wealth back into the population to try and fight the crisis which they essentially manufactured at the start. I am so keen to get stuck into this, but one of the things that I will also say is if you are intimidated by this book, then from this very last tab onwards, so the last like over 100 pages of this book is actually notes, references and sources, so it's not quite as bad as it looks. That being said, it's still basically 500 pages of quite dense non-fiction. So I'll let you know how we get on and how much of the month we end up reading this for. And actually, speaking of non-fiction and speaking of my TBR cart, when I put that one back, I just dragged off the next one that I'm planning on reading this month, and that is Britney Spears' memoir. I do not read a lot of celebrity memoirs at all. There are only a few that have kind of like slipped their way into my collection, but one, I think there's going to be a lot of online discourse about this in the coming months, and I'm a great fan of if you haven't read the source material, then you don't get to have an opinion on it. But I am like a lot of other people, a child of the 90s. I grew up watching a lot of these things happen to Britney Spears, and so I am deeply curious to see what she has to say in her own words, although obviously this one has been ghostwritten. And yeah, I think my purchase of this one was kind of inevitable. Who knows, I may spend my free Spotify audiobook hours on listening to it rather than reading it, but I did want a copy for my shelves, so there's this one. Then next up there is, of course you knew it was coming, Iron Gold, which is the 4th book in the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. I finished Morningstar in October, and if you haven't watched me have a full on-screen crying, snot and tears breakdown over that book, then you should probably go watch that vlog. To say that the original Red Rising trilogy is now one of my favourite trilogies ever that has ever existed would be an understatement. And so of course it is inevitable that I am going to go on and read Iron Gold. And in case you are a Red Rising noob but you are interested in picking up this series, because I have talked ad nauseum about it since I picked it up, that is indeed how the series is structured. There is Red Rising, Golden Sun and Morningstar, and those were the original trilogy books, but then Pierce Brown went on to expand the series with 4 more books, 3 of which have already been published. So we have Iron Gold, Dark Age and Lightbringer, which has just come out in hardback, and there is 1 more planned book to finish out the series. And from what I understand, from Iron Gold onwards, the books are multi-POV, whereas in the first trilogy we only had Darrow's point of view, which is a place that I'm very comfortable now. I like it in Darrow's head, I like his narration, I like the way that he sees the world, but I think that it is inevitable after the things that happened in Morningstar that we need to see a sort of like broader view of the world. So I'm both really scared that the tone of the books are going to change in Iron Gold, and also really looking forward to it, because there are definitely some characters in there that I am desperate to see things from their points of view. Because I am a reader who falls in love primarily with side characters, I am not usually a massive fan of the hero, although I do love Darrow in these books. I am a complete Darrow apologist. And every time I mention this series, I blame Becca for getting me into it, because Becca's the one who told me that I need to read it. And Becca also said to me that Iron Gold and Dark Age are going to absolutely destroy me, and I don't know if I can emotionally handle that. So yay! Another book in another favourite series. And then next up I have 2 books that I started right at the end of October, which I actually purchased right at the end of October. They were the last 2 books that I bought. I went to meet my lovely friend Jill for a theatre date, but it was a couple of hours early, and so I actually popped into a bookshop that has a coffee shop attached to it, and I bought a couple of books and I immediately started them and read them while I was waiting. And honestly, I cannot remember the last time that I just bought a book and immediately started reading it because I wanted to in the moment. It was so nice. I had so much fun. So both of those books are true crime books, which is also a thing that I do find myself gravitating towards in November, so I do wonder whether more of those will pop up. But the first book is In Control by Jane Monckton Smith. So 30 years ago, Jane Monckton Smith joined the police force as kind of like quite a bright-eyed and bushy young officer, and one of the things that she saw repeatedly every single day of her job and just couldn't get her head around was coercive control relationships. But of course 30 years ago, coercive control wasn't a term that had been coined, and it wasn't something which was illegal or could be prosecuted. And so every day on her job she saw this repeating timeline of women going through these relationships and often ending up dead at the end of them. And so she ended up pivoting in her career. She went to university and she wrote a really groundbreaking piece of research which is now used by so many police forces all over the world. The FBI use it. It's taught in universities, it's taught to psychologists and counsellors and people who work in domestic abuse spaces, and it is essentially what she considers to be an 8-stage homicide homicide timeline from before a relationship even begins right through to the planning and the murder that can happen at the end of it. And I am about a third of the way through this one so far, and it's split up into those 8 stages with case studies at all different points to kind of illustrate what she means. And it's so fascinating and so mind-boggling, but also so horrifying. So far, I would really recommend it if you have like an interest in this area of true crime, or if you are a fan of like Laura Bates's books. I think this one would really work for you. And the second book that I finally picked up after so long of seeing it and thinking, oh, I'll get to it one day, is When the Dogs Don't Bark. Angela Gallup joined the police force in I think the late 70s or the early 80s, which was a time where female officers were segregated and had different duties and titles from male officers, and so she was there for kind of like the amalgamation of those two things, and became a forensic scientist who was actually on the front line of a lot of different forensic discoveries that have now like birthed techniques that we still use. And because she was so much at the front line of the forensics, she attended quite a few very high profile British cases, things like the Yorkshire Ripper case, but there are actually quite a few other names that were mentioned on the blurb of this book that were actually the reason that I picked it up, because they're not all horrendous serial killer cases, but they are cases that really stick in like the British consciousness, names like Damilola Taylor, because I think it's easy when you consume a lot of true crime to just get sucked into like the serial killer bubble. So far I'm also about a third of the way through this one, and she is very funny. Like, one of the things that I will say is this is a book of very much two halves. There's a lot of like quite grisly information in here, but there's also a lot of humour at being a woman in this system and having to navigate it. So yeah, I need to finish those two because I've carried them over from the end of October. And then what we are left with are book club books. So my Patreon book club, the Seance Society, have started their first series reread. We are reading through the Dry series by Jane Harper, which is all about Aaron Falk, who is actually a fraud investigator and keeps getting pulled into these sort of like side cases, which are predominantly murders and missing people, which is not what he investigates, but there's a lot of reasons behind it. Jane Harper is an Australian author, and these books are set in like 3 very different places in Australia, and they all have a sort of very unique tone that I find in a lot of Australian fiction, which is something that I've said before. There's something in the tone of Australian fiction that just really works for me. Jane Harper is one of my favourite authors. I read The Dry last month, and now we are on to book 2, which is Force of Nature. And this one screwed me up the first time that I read it. This one really screwed me up. So I'm excited to read it again for the second time. But that does mean that in December I'm going to have to actually finish the series. Like, it'll be good for this box, obviously, but I will actually have to read the last book because I've committed to do so now, and I'm scared. I hate finishing series when I know that there's not going to be any new books in them. And then we have the next 2 books in the Around the Disc in 800 Days read along that I host with Kirsty. In case you haven't heard of this one before, it is a complete Terry Pratchett Discworld read along, all of the 40+ books. And this is the end of year 1, which I am absolutely shooketh at. So we are on books 21 and 22, I think, which are Jingo and The Last Continent. I'm not a big Jingo fan, but The Last Continent will again make anybody who is a fan of Australian literature very happy. So yes, we have those 2 to read, and then we only have 2 more for the entire year. Again, genuinely, this is the longest book project that I have ever committed to, and I'm so proud of myself for keeping up with it. And so that's it, guys. That's where we are with our TBR for the month. That's as many books as I think I can reasonably put on it before we hit the midway point. There's a chance that I'll listen to a few other audiobooks that I have kicking around, and I have a couple of books that I have been reading for a lot of the year, books that are sitting on my paused reading shelf where I've got so far through them and I've put them down and I've just put them to the side and I haven't looked at them, that I would ideally like to finish before the end of the year. I'm not going to say what they are because I'm sick of saying the titles of them in videos and then not reading them. So I'm just going to do the damn thing and then tell you about it afterwards. As I've said, we will have to just wait and see what the wonders of mixtape bring us as I travel to my cabin in the wood all alone. And we shall just have to wait and see what the end of November brings for our bingo board. Send good thoughts and energy my way. If you have got all of the way through this video, then leave me a doggy emoji of your choice down below for when the dogs don't bark, because that's far less depressing than any kind of like scales or piles of books or numbers emojis that we could maybe have had for the bingo board. Let's just go with doggies, your favourite doggy emoji. If you are new here and you are desperate to know what's going to happen with my bingo board numbers, then please hit that subscribe button, and if you have enjoyed this video then please hit that thumbs up, because it really does help my channel, and I will speak to you guys really soon. Bye! I also need you to know that I beat the low battery light filming the end of this video, and I have never felt more accomplished. Like, I feel more accomplished about the battery light than I do about my bingo board.